Welcome in to the Rockies Insider. I am your host and your Rockies Insider, Patrick Lyons, on this very special edition of the Rockies Insider, all about Major League Baseball's impending and imminent expansion. We still have a ways to go. Major League Baseball still has plenty of unfinished business to attend to first. How much is it going to cost? And what are the cities that have taken an early lead to quite possibly get one of the next two teams when Major League Baseball expands from 30 to 32 clubs here in the next decade? There was a piece of news that did come out over the course of the last week, and that was Hall of Famer Barry Larkin joining the Orlando Dreamers as their MLB ambassador. Orlando is one of the 9 cities that currently has a group put together with various members, various plans, some of which have renderings of ballparks, some even have purchased land or are in the process of purchasing a site for which their ballpark will be located. Orlando Dreamers are front and center in that conversation. It's a group that was co-founded in 2019 by Pat Williams, a name you might recognize as being a former executive with the NBA's Orlando Magic. He unfortunately passed away last summer, but that has only given further credence and further ambition for this group to go forward and try to get an expansion club. I was going to save some of this conversation for later, but Orlando came very close to getting expansion club in 1998. You could argue that they had the second best bid, or they were the second best group, but with the first being Tampa, Major League Baseball simply didn't want two teams in the same state that were really about 2 hours apart drive time. So despite having a really good bid together, Orlando was not selected in either of the 93 and 98 expansion clubs. Barry Larkin did say in a press release that it became immediately apparent that Orlando has the most compelling market in the country and could be the next MLB franchise location. At this stage of my career, nothing could be more exciting than being a key part of this effort in my adopted home of Orlando, Florida. Now, in this introductory press conference, the Orlando group is also open to pursuing the Tampa Bay Rays because the Rays stadium situation is still so unknown. It's still up in the air, and perhaps the best way Orlando could get a major league team is by taking one that already exists in Florida, because it does become really hard with Orlando making their case with Tampa so close, so nearby. Say what you will about the two franchises, the Rays and the Marlins. They have not brought in a ton of money, but they have been good citizens. They've been good clubs for MLB's 30. They have done that. The Rays doing it one way, on the cheap, analytics driven. They've been successful over the last 15 plus years. Whereas the Marlins continue to go through fire sale after fire sale. And despite the fact they've got one of the newer ballparks in MLB, they just don't draw fans. But they do tick off a box of being in a major market like Miami. So Orlando definitely has some work ahead of them. Mikey in the chat over on YouTube, Wild the Innocent, asking, what cities were Denver and Miami up against over 30 years ago that are still trying? That's a good question. I'm going to talk about expansion here. 1961 was the first year that ended up going down. Before that, it was just 16 teams. That was it. That was all you had. And there was, in fact, a reason that I'll get to in a moment as to why Major League Baseball ultimately decided that they needed to expand just a little bit. So those are some of the interesting different topics, different scenarios worth going through. 10 of the cities in 1990, when the 1990 CBA was ratified, 10 of the different cities at that time that were considered to be serious candidates. I don't know if all of them had groups that were put together, but you had Buffalo, Charlotte, Denver, Miami, Nashville, Orlando, Phoenix, Sacramento, Tampa Bay, and Washington, D.C. Also, of course, you did have the new ballpark that at the time was Florida Suncoast Dome. Now we know it to be Tropicana Field. That was built in St. Petersburg in hopes of getting one of these expansion franchises. A lot of people probably don't realize that despite the fact that the Rays are one of the newer teams, in fact, they were, you could argue, either Team 29 or Team 30, they have one of the 10 oldest ballparks in the game because Tropicana Field was built before a team was even there. So all the teams that I mentioned, I'm going to either mention today, or they got an expansion franchise, or they had a team move into their metro area. So a lot of interesting scenarios and angles to look at, but a lot still needs to be done in order to Major League Baseball to sign off and say, yes, we are ready to now go to 32 teams. Isaac, thanks for joining me in the chat as always. So what has to happen for expansion to go down? Commissioner Rob Manfred has been saying for the last several years, I want to say 2017 was the first time that idea was really broached. And despite expansion still, we still might be 5+ years away. I'll get to that in a moment. Rob Manfred did say that expansion is an inevitability. Might not be imminent, but it is an inevitability. He would love to announce expansion before his contract expires. He's looking to retire when his contract is up in January of 2029. That'll be somewhere in the middle of the next CBA, which ends in 2026. So you hammer out the details of expansion, and it allows you to start to plan for teams 31 and 32. But that also means we could still be 10 years away from that expansion. So what needs to happen for baseball to really say we are ready for it? Because they are not ready for it. There are easily 2 cities that are ready to expand baseball. Easily 2 cities that could welcome 2 new ball clubs, build a new stadium, build that infrastructure. Those cities and many more already. But Major League Baseball itself is not ready. There's some unfinished business that needs tending to. 1A and 1B are the A's and the Rays. One of the key reasons why you have to get the A's and the Rays settled is so that when it comes time for expansion, and when it comes time to say, here's how much it's going to cost to get one of these expansion franchises, no group and no billionaire out there will be able to just go buy a team and move it to the city of their choice. Everyone will be settled. One of the reasons why the A's are going through what they're going through is because they weren't able to extract a brand new stadium from the city of Oakland. So they are still in the process of doing that for Las Vegas. That still looks like it's good to go, but I wouldn't even say that we are at the 100th percentile that is official. Until that goes down, it might not go down. The Rays are dealing with the same thing. They thought they had a deal, and they did not. And it seems as if that continues to fall through. So once you've got every team in place, and once you have every team that is satisfied with their ballpark, that is another key element to this, because some of the leverage that teams are able to do, or able to utilize, is say, you know what, we'd love for these renovations to get paid for by the city. Maybe we'll go 50-50 on that, or we do need a new ballpark. And if you don't want to give us one, that's okay, because there are other cities out there that we can move to. That becomes an option. And as soon as that option is off the table, because the teams are all good and the stadiums are all good, now all of a sudden you can look to the outside and say, all right, here is the price. Mexico, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, one of those is on my list of 20 teams that could possibly find itself in the conversation for an expansion club coming up here. But again, you have to get the A's and Rays settled. You've got some other issues that are looming. When it comes to the Rays, we know that the Tropicana Field was damaged by Hurricane Milton. We still don't know if it's going to be playable in 2026, 2025. They got to play in a minor league ballpark in the low A affiliate of the New York Yankees. The A's are also playing in a minor league ballpark, but it does look like they are going to have themselves a big league stadium before the Rays do. So once that gets sorted out, and you don't even have to have those two teams open up a brand new facility somewhere in order to announce expansion. You just have to have the ball rolling. And as much as it seemed that the ball's been rolling for the Rays, it continues to come to a stop. You have to build so much momentum in order to say, we've got this. There's a shovel in the ground. All the bills have been paid. In 2 years' time, 3 years, whatever it may be, we will definitively have a stadium. So until that day comes, nothing is guaranteed. So as I said, once the musical chairs stops, at least the city edition of musical chairs, and you can't just go up and buy a franchise and move it wherever you want, then you can go and expand. From now until the time that they make the decision to expand Major League Baseball to 32 teams, some other things may rear their nasty head. The Diamondbacks may need to figure out their ballpark situation. Chase Field is pretty darn old, 1998, their first year. And they need to have major renovations done, which is something that the city has balked at. Or they need to get a new ballpark, or in a worst case scenario, end up like the Arizona Coyotes and move to Utah. I don't know if the Diamondbacks are moving to Utah, but they may have to move somewhere else. That is certainly part of that negotiation. I don't think Ken Kendrick wants to do something like that. I don't think they want to tear a team away from Phoenix, which is a great market. But I think you need to use that leverage. I do know of owners calling up the commissioner and saying, hey, I want to talk about this city. Montreal has been one of those cities. Vegas has been one of those cities. For many years, for decades, Denver was a city that teams would use as a catalyst. They would use that to say, you know what? If you don't pay for these renovations of this ballpark, or you don't get us a new ballpark altogether, we're going to go take our business to Denver. Denver was utilized as that city that was on deck for expansion. And there have been owners in the past that have called the commissioner to say, you know what, let's talk a little bit. Let's kick the tires on Vegas. Let's kick the tires on Montreal, so that when they do go back and negotiate with their city, they can say, hey, just so you know, I've talked with the commissioner about city A, city B, city C in order to get what they want. That has happened. That's just good business, right? That's just good negotiating. So that's one of those things that could, again, rear its head if the Diamondbacks don't end up getting what they want. Rockies, because of that stadium situation with the Rays, they are not going to have a game on opening day. They're going to have their own version of opening day, but it's going to be one day after, on March 28th, on Friday, March 28th, one day after the other 28 teams play their games. Just kind of how it ends up going, right? Kansas City, if we're talking about ballparks that need to get sorted out. Kansas City wanted a downtown ballpark. Since Kauffman Stadium is the fifth oldest in the majors, it's going to be 52 years old. And while there's been a ton of history there, and there are going to be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Royals fans and baseball fans that are going to be really sad when the day comes for Kauffman Stadium to get torn down or to be used for something different, could also stick around in some capacity. There's not the same amount of history and reverence as a baseball cathedral as the Fenway Parks, the Wrigley Fields, Dodger Stadium. All of those, again, are these meccas of baseball and baseball history. So Kansas City was in the process of getting that new ballpark for 2028. There was a vote last April, but voters rejected the sales tax. Now, what they're going to do next, it's still not clear. There's even been some discussion that they can move across the river to Kansas City, Kansas, if they can get some land there, if they can get a good deal there. But I think that would be that would be awful for those who are actually in Kansas City proper. You would love for Kansas City to work that out with the Royals. But Again, business is business. The Royals, while they've always been in Kansas City hasn't always been a Royals town. First, it was the Kansas City Athletics who moved there from Philadelphia. Then Charlie Finley moved the team to Oakland. So despite the fact that the Royals have always been in Kansas City has not always been a Royals town. Angel Stadium turns 60 years old in 2026. White Sox are working on a new ballpark as Rate Field, formerly Guaranteed Rate Field. You might also call it New Comiskey. It's going to be 35 years old next year. Now, it was only built in 1991. Some of you listening to this, you're going, oh, that was before I was even born. Okay, fair enough. But it was only built in 1991. Keep in mind, that was the last ballpark before Camden Yards changed the game, changed how we viewed ballparks as these living baseball cathedrals. Guaranteed Rate does not have any of that charm. I don't want to sound too critical of it, but for me, for someone who, besides covering baseball, I'm a baseball fan. I love baseball. I'm a baseball addict. And before I started doing this, and I went on a road trip with my dad, we went to 4 ballparks in 4 days. One of those 4 was Wrigley Field. We had a great time. And then the next year, we ran it back and did 7 games in 7 days all across the Midwest. When it came time to come through Chicago, the decision was, do we go to Wrigley Field again, or do we check off Comiskey on our list? We went to Wrigley again. So I've still never seen a game at Comiskey, at the new Comiskey, at Rate Field. And I don't feel too bad about that. I'd love to get there. I've never got to Oakland Coliseum. But bottom line is, for a lot of baseball fans, you'd probably rather go to about 4 or 5 Cubs games for every one White Sox game. And yeah, sure, right now you're talking about a team that lost 121 games, but all things being equal, Wrigley Field is a much better facility, especially after their renovations. And it's just a much better experience overall for a baseball fan. It has history that Rate Field does not have. So all of those stadium situations, you could argue, are powder kegs. They've got to work those out. It wasn't a good look, as pointed out in the chat, that during the WBC, the roof was closed and people were getting wet during the World Baseball Classic in 2023. It's a roof. Something's clearly wrong there. They've had issues in the past with not being able to close the roof during the game. They have to handle that before or after. A decision has to be made early. So not ideal in any way. Not ideal in any shape or form. Also in the chat, I want Raleigh. You might be surprised. I'm going to get to these 9 cities. Not only is Raleigh on the list of 20 cities in North America that could end up with a team when MLB decides to expand, but they are one of 9 groups that have been put together in cities around the U.S. to try to attract Major League Baseball. So if you're making a top 10 list, Raleigh has to be on that top 10 list. Mikey's saying Nashville, New Orleans, and San Antonio. All 3 of those are in my top 20. Only one of those, I think, is a viable situation for Major League Baseball. I'll tell you why here in just a little bit. But you just have to hope that those situations are fine. There could be other ones. I don't think so. I think all the rest of the ballpark situations would not be nearly as dire. For us in Denver, Coors Field and the Rockies, totally fine, 0 issues. The ballpark's been kept up really well. There was a 30-year lease that was signed less than a decade ago, so there's no plans to leave Denver whatsoever. Dodger Stadium and Wrigley Field, they've just had renovations recently, so they're going to be fine for the next decade plus. Rogers Center just underwent major renovations. Camden Yards, Progressive Fields, that they've both been maintained very well. Fenway Park, you never know. Fenway Park could be one of those, but Boston is not a place where they are going to mess around. They will make sure the Red Sox stay there. They will make sure that something gets figured out. You hope they don't have to move out to Foxborough like the Patriots, but they'll figure that out. But Fenway Park, it's a tough spot. It's a tough spot to figure out. I could even imagine a scenario in which, just thinking now off the top of my head, whereby Major League Baseball, could Major League Baseball buy Fenway Park and make it similar to the Field of Dreams game? Could they make it something like the Little League Classic? I don't know that that's going to happen in the next 10, 15, 20 years. But if in 50 years from now you said the Red Sox don't play at Fenway Park anymore, but they do go back and visit and teams do go play there, they might not be from Massachusetts at all. You could get Vancouver versus Portland at Fenway Park in the Fenway game, in the Fenway series. That's the kind of iconic ballpark, an iconic facility that they've got there down in the Fens. So that one I'm not as worried about, but nevertheless, you've got to get the ballpark situations handled. Another question mark is, how is Major League Baseball going to handle the RSN situations that are currently brewing? Those regional sports networks. Does that have to get settled first before they're able to expand? I don't necessarily think so. Again, it's a situation that continues to evolve. It hasn't been anything that's blown up in their face necessarily. It's not ideal to have the Padres, Diamondbacks, and Rockies just on MLB, MLB.TV, like just being broadcast by Major League Baseball and just a bare bones kind of setup. Not great, but it's something. It's definitely better than nothing. And I think those people who subscribe to that and they pay for that service, I think for the most part, they're actually pretty happy. They would like a little bit more in Colorado. You know, the club is just something that's just not around anymore, where they would go in and do these sit-down one-on-one interviews with players, and they'd mic them up, and it was dynamic. It was great. You got to know the players a lot better. You got to know a lot of the people behind the scenes and in the organization a lot better. That is now gone because the RSN failed the Rockies. So they're just on Rockies.tv. That's a shame, but you can continue to go about your business as normal. So I don't think the RSN situation is totally going to ruin anything. Another Canada team. I've got two on the list. But as Mikey likes to say, U.S. better than Canada. There's one team in Canada. There's one city in Canada that already has a group. Another team another city that is sleeping right now. But nevertheless, two teams from Canada will have a chance. And I'm curious with how much the conversation for expansion is going to impact the next CBA after the 2026 season. One of the things that both sides typically like to do, and usually Major League Baseball, the 30 owners, do a better job at this, or they're more aggressive in looking at a scenario and situation and saying, we're thinking about doing this, but we know how much it's going to benefit you. They want to do it. Major League Baseball would love to do it and expand to 32 teams. But they might spin it to say, you know, that does create 52 new jobs, 52 new roster spots in the majors for you and your players association. How badly do you want that? Because if you want it badly, you're going to have to give some things over to us. Or we've got some ideas of doing business slightly differently. That's what's going to be at stake with this next CBA. I don't know how much expanding is a factor in this idea that we could be in for another work stoppage. The idea has even been floated that perhaps we might lose an entire 2027 season. I pray to God that doesn't happen. But again, depending on how the conversation goes with expansion, because it benefits both parties, I think pretty equally. You could argue that it benefits the billionaires a lot more than it affects the millionaires. This could be a negative issue when this next CBA ends. One of the reasons why this benefits the owners, I feel, a lot more than it does the players. Again, each individual player who's in the union, they would like to do certain things that benefit the union but creating 52 new jobs doesn't necessarily take care of the union members that currently exist. Hey, I want to take care of the union members that are here right now with us, not the fictional 52 that could be coming if with there's expansion. Because when it comes to the owner's side, when they get the expansion fee, that gets split amongst all 30 owners, all 30 teams. So once you have all of the teams in place, their ballpark situation handled, so now they're no longer going to say, oh, we might move if we don't get this new facility. Once everything is settled, it becomes clear you can't just buy a team and then move it. You can't do that anymore. Now, all of a sudden, Major League Baseball is going to ask for $2 billion for one of two expansion clubs. I've seen it even as high as $2.5 billion for the next expansion clubs. And you divvy that amongst, anywhere from $4 to $5 billion divided amongst 30 owners. It's close to $150 million that immediately goes in their pocket because of expansion. That is what's at stake. And knowing full well that these will be the first expansion teams in over 30 years, it's another reason why you want to pony up to try to get this team and to build a lasting legacy. That's something that, despite how Rockies fans feel towards Charlie Monfort, guess what? Charlie Monfort was the guy that helped get baseball to Denver. He was one of the most critical figures in doing that. And so no matter what might happen on the field win-loss record, when you're looking in the history books and you're reading about expansion in the 90s, and you're reading about Denver being one of only a few cities that have all four major sports teams, including MLS, you will see Charlie Monfort's name a lot more so than Dick Monfort as well. But Charlie Monfort was that guy. And there are people in 20 other cities that are saying, I would love to put my name on something like that. I would love to build a legacy so that my grandchildren can come to baseball games in my town, in my city, and know that their grandfather or grandmother made that sacrifice and got that job done. That's what's at stake when it comes to expansion. It is history. It is absolutely history. So let's talk about the history of expansion, because it's not that big. We haven't had a ton of expansion in baseball, especially when there are teams that have 100+ years of history, the 16 original clubs. All right, we're up to 30 now, but there was 16 forever. The first time we had expansion in Major League Baseball was 1961. You had the Los Angeles Angels and the Washington Senators. And the Washington Senators were basically like a Cleveland Browns situation. If you know the Cleveland Browns story, they moved to Baltimore and then they became the Cleveland Browns expansion franchise, and then they ended up taking back all their entire history. So the Washington Senators existed long before 1961. They used to be an awful, awful franchise. They used to say Washington, first in war, first in politics, last in the American League, because they were always very bad. But then Clark Griffith moved the team to Minnesota, and they became the Minnesota Twins. And then in 1961, a completely different Washington Senators existed as an expansion team. And continuing with a little bit on the history side of things, that's also one of the reasons why the commissioner at the time, Ford C. Frick, who was also Babe Ruth's ghostwriter, he didn't want Babe Ruth's record to be broken by anyone. So one of the reasons why Ford C. Frick put an asterisk next to Roger Maris's home run total was because, A, he didn't do it in 154 games, which is how many games Babe Ruth hit 60 home runs in. The schedule expanded to 162 games. But It was also that because of expansion in the American League, so you had 10 teams in the American, only 8 in the National League, but because of that expansion, the pitching population was diluted. You had these two teams in the Angels and Senators. Their expansion draft was only the teams in the American League. That was it. We had only recently broken the color barrier, and players from Japan and Korea weren't coming over quite like they are today. So basically, like now, even when we have expansion, teams don't have very good pitchers because they're like the leftover parts, right? So that was another reason why there was an asterisk next to Roger Maris's home run total. 1962, you get the New York Mets and the Houston Colt 45s, who of course would later be renamed the Houston Astros and also moved to the American League. Then there was a bit of a break after 4 years in 2 teams. In 1969, 4 teams were added all at once. San Diego Padres and the Montreal Expos. And the Seattle Mariners were also added there. Or rather, not Seattle Mariners, Seattle Pilots, who after 1 year, 1969, became the Brewers. And then the Montreal Expos in 2005 became the Washington Nationals. In 1977, the Toronto Blue Jays and Seattle Mariners came into the league 8 years after the previous expansion. But that also created an imbalance. You had 14 teams in the AL and 12 in the NL. In 93, you get the Colorado Rockies and Florida Marlins at that time to put us at 28 teams in Major League Baseball, 14 and 14. And then in 1998, the Rays, Tampa Bay Rays, moved to the American League. They were at that time the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, and the Arizona Diamondbacks went to the National League. You also had a bit of a division shuffle where because the Rays, the Devil Rays at the time, went to the American League East, Detroit went from the American League East to the American League Central, and the Milwaukee Brewers moved from the AL Central to the National League Central in order to make sure each team had an even number of clubs. So you actually then shifted the balance. So the National League now had 16 teams and the American League had 14. The reason for that was interleague play was not what it is today. American League had the DH, National League allowed pitchers to hit. They were different rules. So after years in which the American League had more teams than the NL, they kind of switched spots until eventually saying interleague play is fine. We can have an odd number of teams in the both AL and NL. $2 billion is what these expansion fees are going to be, and they'll get split up amongst 30 teams. So $4 billion divided amongst 30 clubs. That's $133 million each. That immediately goes into the pockets of the owners of each of the teams. If you get $2.5 billion, so $5 billion total, you're talking $167 million for each franchise. Pretty darn impressive. Back in 1993, though, Rockies and Marlins paid $95 million. Don't you feel like you could get a couple friends together and maybe, put together half of that, right? Inflation. Then in 98, though at the time it was 1995 when they got approved, Diamondbacks and Devil Rays, they paid $130 million for those expansion fees. One of the things that Rob Manfred did say, and even without saying it, you knew this was on the mind of Major League Baseball. He wants a team in the West and a team in the East. A team on the Eastern Standard Time and then a team in the Mountain or Pacific Standard Time. So if you look at a map, the West/Northwest is very underrepresented. It's going to make you think about Portland and Salt Lake City as frontrunners. The South and Southeastern part of the United States also seems a little underrepresented as far as Major League Baseball is concerned. Nashville and Charlotte, maybe even Raleigh, become those frontrunners. But other cities and other groups are going to make their bid. 20 teams could reasonably get their act together, and some already have, in order to get one of the two upcoming expansion clubs that have not yet been announced, but very well could be this time 5 years from now. When you get to 32 teams, the other interesting part, the math of it all, becomes shuffling of the divisions. When you get 32 teams, that now means there's going to be 16 teams in each league. That makes sense. It's what the NFL has. What the NFL also has is 4-team divisions. Right now, there's currently 3 in both the AL and NL. When you get to 32 teams, you're going to have 8 4-team divisions and 0 National and American League. I'll say that again. With 32 teams, you're going to have 2 16-team leagues, 4 8-team divisions, and no National League or American League. Baseball is changing. Baseball is evolving. And this is the next step. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think they're just names. In many ways, saying American League and National League are just names. But that will effectively be the end of it. I think Major League Baseball would like to continue with that branding. And so you might just end up having half the teams shifting over into what we call the American League. Maybe that's the West Coast. And then the other half of the teams shifting over into what's called the National League. And that's basically the teams on the East Coast. Because travel has been made paramount. Travel, the discussion about saving money for these teams has existed since the pandemic, when you saw that teams from the West played teams from the West. The National League West did not play the National League during the 2020 pandemic campaign. They only played teams in the West, AL and NL. And to reduce travel, to make more money, to reduce their investment, but still maximize profits, you put teams that are in the same area in the same league. In the same division, I should say. So that means having the Yankees on the East Coast in the American League, and then having a team like the Angels on the West Coast in the same American League is just unnecessary. If you're going to limit travel and still have a balanced schedule, you'll still make your way out there. You'll still have your West Coast road trips, but ultimately it will cut down travel somewhat dramatically. And Major League Baseball cares about that. For the Rockies, that probably means you're now in a division with maybe Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, and one of the teams from Texas, or 2 of the teams from Texas. I think in the past that I've gone and laid out a map and said, all right, in theory, because right, it all depends on what the teams are. It all depends on the expansion clubs. Because Salt Lake City is in one spot in the West, Portland's in another, so is Vancouver. So is Las Vegas. And I throw them out there because if the A's find a way magically to get themselves back to Oakland, or if Sacramento gets into the fray, or if the A's move to Las Vegas and then Oakland wants one of the expansion clubs, again, that changes the mathematics, that changes the geography. But the thing that I keep coming back to when I look at a map and I look at the divisions and hypothesize what the next 2 teams are going to be, I would bet strongly that the Rockies would be in the same division as the Kansas City Royals, Texas Rangers, and Houston Astros. That becomes a division. That's what I see. Great trivia question here. What was the first team west of St. Louis? That would be after the 1957 season. You had both owners of the Giants and Dodgers agreeing to move west and go to California for the 1958 season. And then after that, you've got expansion starting in 1961 with the Los Angeles Angels. That got it all started. There's also another event that really helped kickstart expansion that I'll get to here in just a second. But one of the things that has me excited about expansion, and again, if you weren't sure how much of a baseball nerd I am, this will definitely tip the hand. Because back in 2017, 2018, when Manfred first started talking about this idea that, hey, expansion's coming. It's a ways off, but it is coming. So cities, get your groups together, start raising that money, Do what you got to do. It's on its way. One of the things that jumped out to me, and it becomes even more interesting after what happened in 2020, is when we get 2 new teams in Major League Baseball, we also get 8 new minor league teams. Low A, high A, double A, triple A. With 2 new teams comes 8 new minor league franchises, 8 new minor league affiliates. It's pretty convenient that the minor leagues went from 160 to 120 and kicked out 43 different minor league cities and ballparks from underneath the minor league baseball umbrella. Well, guess what? With expansion, if you're one of those 43, and at least you're somewhat geographically close to another league, you have a chance to get back into the hunt. Now, I preface that because Billings, Montana, and Idaho Falls, you could go Missoula. These are 3 different cities in the northern part of the United States that were part of the Pioneer League. There's really no way for any of those cities to get back on the minor league baseball map. Colorado Springs was a part of that, and there's been issues with the airport. That's one of the reasons why AAA and the Pacific Coast League wanted to get out of Colorado Springs. Some of that had to do with travel. If the airport is better, could you maybe see? I don't think you could see the Springs necessarily getting back into AAA. Maybe. You need a new ballpark. You're not going to play at Security Service Field. But a new ballpark is going to help you out. And a new ballpark, even if it's done slightly cheaper than a 15,000 seat stadium with a second deck on it, which they didn't have in Colorado Springs when it was the Sky Sox. But maybe Colorado Springs can get looped into the Texas League. It's a little bit farther away. But again, with the changing geography of these 8 new minor league clubs, maybe Colorado Springs could get back in there. But again, 43 teams were wiped off the umbrella of minor league baseball in 2020 when they went from 160 to 120 teams. And the reason why the number is 43 and not 40 is because, yes, we went from 160 to 120, so that's 40 less affiliates, but 3 independent teams joined minor league baseball. The Sugarland Skeeters took someone's spot. The St. Paul Saints took someone's spot, and the Somerset Patriots. All 3 of those were independent league teams. They were run really well. The facilities, the stadiums were great. They jumped on board. That's where the extra 3 ends up coming from. So that's got me excited to think that minor league baseball is going to come back to 8 different cities in 2030, 2031, whenever we get started. And minor league baseball will also come back before Major League Baseball. That's the other piece, is that when you're an expansion team, you get to draft a year early and start working guys as prospects through the system. So you need a minor league team, in low A, maybe not high A, but low A, Arizona Complex League, Dominican Summer League teams. They can get started because those players are so young, and they're not going to, go out and hit 50 home runs and say, I'd love to get promoted. I've earned promotion, but there's no team above me because they don't really exist yet. You don't want that situation to happen. So I'm fascinated by that. So let's get to the big part of the show. Who is in play? 20 different cities I've targeted as being potential landing places for Major League Baseball when it expands to 30 teams. "20 cities Major League Baseball could end up in North America, but only 9 have formed a group to put together an expansion bid. That's important to know because they've gotten off to a head start. Las Vegas was always a city that, to me, despite the fact that there wasn't a group that got started there, they just had enough money to blow everybody out of the water, and it was going to be whatever, fine. You got the pieces together with enough time that it's okay that you were the last of the group to do it because we want to be in Vegas, so we're going to get that done. There's no real cities right now that has that advantage. Your group is going to have to work for you. So I don't see any city that is an immediate juggernaut. It's not like the English Premier League where you get a team in the lower division coming out of nowhere and actually like contending. They can contend on paper in the win-loss column, but there's no like major city that exists out there that you can say, man, if you put a team here, they are going to do serious numbers. Chicago, LA, New York City, they already exist. And no, I don't have a third team for Los Angeles and a third team for the New York metro area. That's something that some people have floated the idea like, oh, could Newark get a team or something like that? That's just not happening. We're not in that place. There's no major sports organization. No sports league has 3 teams in one city. That eventually will happen, but we're not there just yet. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, Orlando Dreamers, they're out there. They've got a group. Why do they make sense? A few reasons. They recently moved into the top 20. In fact, they're the 15th largest TV market in the United States, which is the best of all the expansion options. They're ahead of Minneapolis, St. Paul. That's an advantage that they would have. And as I mentioned earlier, Orlando was a finalist in 1998. The city made a push. They passed a tourist tax on hotel rooms that would have gone up following the construction of a stadium. But unfortunately, when the decision was made in March of 95, Tampa was just there ahead of them. They had made 6 different attempts to get a club over the previous 18 years, dating back to 77. There was even a deal in place for the Giants. The San Francisco Giants were going to move to Tampa in 1992. That ultimately was nixed by the owners. So Tampa had that edge over Orlando. And I do think that as long as Tampa is there, Tampa Bay, St. Petersburg, whatever you want to call them, it's going to become hard for Orlando to get that job done. Now in 2019, Orlando Magic co-founder Pat Williams held a press conference announcing his intention to create an MLB team in Orlando. He called them the Dreamers, and it remains a dream as of right now. It's kind of interesting because Orlando is one of the few places on this list that doesn't even have a minor league team. They did. I think they were actually even called the Orlando Rays. So that would be fitting. They've already got a logo drawn up, but they did have a minor league team for a while. In fact, even before the Rays, from 1963 to 2003, they had a club, and then they were eventually purchased and moved to Montgomery to become the Montgomery Biscuits. So I think one of the other larger obstacles for Orlando is that they are so close to Tampa. They're 94 miles from where the Magic play, from where the Rays play. That's the separation between those two facilities. And it's within the Rays' zone of control. Each city, each major league team has a zone of control, a 75-mile radius around the city. And there's even locations that are much further out that are considered, hey, this is our territory. It's like Wyoming. You think about, 100 miles north of Denver, 200 miles north of Denver. Okay, you're in Wyoming, maybe even southern parts of Montana. That's considered the Rockies territory. So if a team decided they wanted to move there, they would have to work something out with the Rockies to negotiate those rights. So where Orlando wants to be, in Orlando, they are very much in the Rays area. They would have to work that out. I think the Nationals and Orioles are still in litigation for that situation when the Nationals moved into DC in 2005, because the Orioles are saying, hey, what's going on? Like, we're here. We exist. They just moved into our market. That was ours. Texas needs a National League team. Again, we might not have AL and NL anymore. I've got 2 Texas cities on this list. One of them has a group. One does not. What's going on, Brian? Thanks for joining me. Thanks for giving me that momentum. Oh no, I'm probably only halfway done through this bad boy. This is a long one. This is a marathon sesh. Props if you're there until the end. You can go to orlandodreamers.com. They've got a website. I think you can even email some of their board members. Like, I accidentally clicked on someone's picture and it was like Jim at orlandodreamers.com. I was like, oh, okay. They've got a sports advisory board that contains some notable names: Oscar Robertson, NBA Hall of Famer; Jim Cott, Hall of Famer; Johnny Damon, Hall of Very Good; AJ Pierzynski, and Colorado's own Clint Hurdle. Orlando sits about 4 hours away from Miami, 2.5, 3-hour drive from Tampa. Again, I would not be surprised if Orlando puts itself in discussion as a home for the Tampa Bay Rays if Tampa or St. Petersburg doesn't end up working out. I could see them entering that conversation, because that may be the only way that they get expansion. Because as I would rank them, and from the people that I've talked to and discussed this with, Orlando just is not one of those places. It's got an NBA team. It's got a successful MLS team. But beyond that, it's somewhat of an outlier. More cities being floated that are on my list of 20. We'll get there. Third up on the list, the Nashville Stars and Music City Baseball. Actually, correction. This is number 2 on the list. The Nashville Stars. They already have a name. They got a website, MLBmusiccity.com. Now, Music City Baseball was founded in 2019, and the Nashville Stars Baseball Club was created in 2023. One of the reasons why they're opting for the name Nashville Stars, they've got it all set up. They've got a logo, they've got caps. They're doing it really, really well. They're going with the name Nashville Stars, which might not jump off the page to you, but keep in mind they are honoring a Negro League team of the same name. And right now, there are no Major League Baseball teams that use a nickname, a primary nickname, as an homage to a Negro League team. That doesn't exist. They would, in fact, be the first. Don Mattingly and Dave Stewart were some of the biggest names on the baseball side when they first announced that Nashville would be putting a group together. And they've got tons of people on the baseball advisory board. R.A. Dickey, who went to Vanderbilt. Tim Corbin, the legendary head coach of the University of Vanderbilt. Barry Zito. On this list, you also have active baseball personnel like Mike Schilt and Dave Dombrowski, but I'm not sure if Dombrowski is still working with the Nashville Stars, as right after he signed on to help this bid with the Nashville Stars, he did accept a job in 2021 as the president of baseball operations with the Phillies. So is he still working with them? Not exactly sure. Conflict of interest? I don't think so. What's really interesting about Nashville's bid, and I will say it is the best. It is the best so far. And bid's not the right word. The Nashville group so far, what they have been planning, is that they also have, the Nashville Stars, they've also got a music industry advisor side, as they're calling it. That group includes Darius Rucker, Luke Combs, Kix Brooks from Brooks and Dunn, Kane Brown, Maren Morris, and Justin Timberlake, to name a few. Their board of directors includes Eddie George, formerly of the Tennessee Titans, and Bob Kendrick of the Negro League Museum. Their branding is really solid. Their caps were designed by Gemma Wong, who he's currently a creative consultant for Cactus Jack LLC. That's Travis Scott's Nike brand. The logo was designed by Jerry Lorenzo Manuel Jr., a fashion designer who actually founded the streetwear label Fear of God. That name may sound familiar because he's also the son of a former big league manager, Jerry Manuel. So they are doing everything right. The group sought to buy some land for a stadium by the Cumberland River, not too far from where the Titans ballpark is located. They're hoping to privately fund a stadium. They would become one of the lowest metropolitan areas in MLB. They'd actually be smaller than Milwaukee, but Milwaukee is doing fine. Attendance is so-so. Titans, their home attendance last year was 29 out of 32, but the Predators, they fill up their arena quite well. The location of where they're at, it sits pretty nicely, 4 hours from both Atlanta and Cincinnati. So Nashville, again, I think they really check off so many of the right boxes when you're looking on the East Coast. And when it comes down to it, I think Nashville has one of the top two best groups together that they've put together. I think Nashville, if I was saying right now, a lot can change. A lot can change. Right now, I am saying Nashville would get one of these expansion clubs. Brian asking, if we don't have AL, NL anymore, I wonder what it would look like if they adopted a soccer league standings with tables. That's not appealing for anybody. The table, that doesn't look great. And one of the reasons why soccer has it is because those standings are very important, because if you're down on the bottom, you can get relegated. And as we know in North America, they just don't have relegation whatsoever. They really don't. And no, despite the fact that the success of the Savannah Bananas, who you could argue maybe is the 31st highest revenue of any team that plays baseball, they will not be getting a team. But would somebody possibly bring in Jesse Cole, the owner, the creator of the Bananas? You could have something like that. Number 3 on the list, Portland. The Portland Diamond Project. You can actually check out portlanddiamondproject.com. They were one of the first groups to get kicked off. And Portland has actually kicked the tires in the past 2 decades on getting a team in MLB. You may or may not remember that in 2003, the mayor at the time had a plan to lure the Expos. In 2006, Marlins ownership, when they were trying to get a new stadium, again, this is one of the things that you can utilize to get a new ballpark, is you go travel the country and you visit some different cities. And the Marlins ownership group traveled to Portland in 2006 in hopes of saying, you know what, maybe, I don't know, Portland Marlins. I don't like the sound of that, but I do like the sound of, getting a nice discounted ballpark. Oh, what's that, Miami? You are going to build us a new stadium? Thanks, but no thanks, Portland. Now, last October, the Portland City Council unanimously approved a resolution to support PDP's efforts to bring Major League Baseball to Portland and construct a new stadium in the South waterfront neighborhood at Zedell Yard. So they've got an area that they are very much looking to revitalize. And they have a really solid track record of supporting their teams. The Trailblazers in the NBA, the Portland Timbers of MLS, they were supporting long before they were in MLS. They were selling out that facility. Timbers, they actually sold out 163 home games prior to the pandemic. Like, that's how hardcore those fans are there. The NWSL, they've got the Thorns. WNBA are expanding to Portland. So Portland is one of those next cities that are on the come up. When you're talking about the West Coast, Portland definitely has so many things that are going right for them right now. Now, it's the 21st largest media market. They're 20th in population, but they're 10th in median household. So that is a market that's got more money than others. That could be beneficial to them. Russell Wilson and Sierra have been linked to them, and they become a decent travel partner for Seattle. They're about 3 hours from Seattle, 650 miles from San Francisco. That's a non-issue. But a team in Portland, much like with the Seattle Mariners, they're going to have to do a lot of traveling because they're so much further away from the rest of the country, even more so than we see on a two-dimensional map. If you look on a globe, they're really a lot farther out. But if you kill the American League and National League and you just have the Western Conference, Eastern Conference, then Portland and Seattle are going to be playing each other a lot, with San Francisco and maybe Las Vegas in their division. So now all of a sudden they're not traveling quite as much. And, maybe they're only going to Boston once every 2 years versus every year, which is what they are doing now with the Mariners and Red Sox, both in the American League. Number 4, and I think this is a group that's been making a lot of the right noise. And I'm beginning to think might be the best city on the West Coast that could be in line for an MLB expansion. It's Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City and BigLeagueUtah.com, they are a real player when it comes to Major League Baseball expansion. We know they've got the Jazz. We know Real Salt Lake has been successful in the past. They just recently were able to get the Coyotes to come to Utah. And before the A's found a home in West Sacramento, Utah said, we'll gladly host the A's while their new ballpark is getting prepared in Las Vegas. So Salt Lake City is very serious about getting Major League Baseball. Real Salt Lake, they were not one of the original MLS clubs. I kind of thought that they were in my memory. Not true. They came in the mid to late 2000s, but they helped kick off the expansion revolution. 2005 was their first year. They were one of 20 new MLS clubs over a 20-year period. Now, the website of BigLeagueUtah.com says a coalition to bring Major League Baseball to Utah. Big League Utah, a broad-based community coalition, believes Utah is the future of America's pastime. Like baseball's brightest stars, Utah is a 5-tool player for its growth, economy, location, sports culture, and quality of life. The coalition has targeted a shovel-ready site for a new ballpark at the 100-acre Rocky Mountain Power District in Salt Lake City. They are getting their ducks in a row, Salt Lake City. And with how well the Coyote situation has worked out for them so far, we'll see. That is really making Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City to me really feels like Denver 2.0. It's what Denver was in the 90s when they eventually got the Rockies and then got the Colorado Avalanche. Don't forget, there was the Colorado Rockies before the baseball version. Yeah, they had NHL, but it wasn't very long before they moved to New Jersey. So the Rockies aren't even the youngest of the 4 major sports leagues in Denver. The Miller family, who has owned the Jazz for 36 years, they had previously owned the Salt Lake Bees in the past. They are at the helm of this bid. As of right now, Ryan Smith, who owns a majority stake now in the Jazz and Bees, as well as the Utah Hockey Club and Real Salt Lake, he's not a part of this, but will he eventually get into the fray? I think very likely. They've got stadium renderings already. So, look, they're good to go. They've drawn support from the governor and the mayor of Salt Lake City. And they got some support from 2 notable names. One more notable than another. Dale Murphy, not yet a Hall of Famer. If he can get in, and I think he's deserving of it, and he might eventually here in the next 5 to 10 years via Veterans Committee, and he would become the 4th member of the Colorado Rockies in the Baseball Hall of Fame. That will happen before Nolan Arenado gets in. Dale Murphy in the next 10 years. Lock it in. But Dale Murphy is at the front of the Big League Utah push to get Major League Baseball at Salt Lake City. He's a 2-time MVP in the National League, back-to-back MVPs, in fact, in center field for Atlanta. He's a Portland native who had previously vouched for the Portland Diamond Project, but he switched his allegiance to the Utah group. Jeremy Guthrie, also a former Rocky, is a part of that coalition as well. They'd be 500 miles from Denver, 400 miles from Vegas, so they definitely take up a section of the United States that is currently very underrepresented, right? One of the cons, I think, is that it has a metropolitan area of only 1.26 million, which would be the smallest by far among MLB teams. In the chat, I like this question. You might not like my answer. But how would the playoff format change? If you've got 32 teams, how many clubs are going to make the postseason? I don't think you want 16 in the postseason. 12? Absolutely. I think 12 is probably a really solid number. Right now you've got 12. So, and that was part of the reason. That was part of the math of why they ultimately decided to expand out to 12 teams, was because, okay, when we get to 32, we're going to have 12 teams. So we might as well start to do it now. You could also figure out a way to have 14. You could do that. Again, depending on, giving a bye to the team in the best record. Are you possibly even giving a 2-round bye to the team that finishes in first place and you instead of having a wild card round, you almost have a pre-wild card round? Can you have just a one-off game? Could you fly a bunch of teams into a certain location and say, we're going to have 4 games in, let's say, Houston, because they've got a dome? I don't like the example for Houston, but let's say, again, you find a facility that you want to go to and play those games in October. It's one game. You fly in on a Tuesday. Monday is for a game 163 if you need it. But you go and you just have a free-for-all. You have 4 games going on, 8 teams playing a 1-game playoff to then get into the wild card round. And then you're playing 2 out of 3. Then you're going to the next city. And so if you're getting a bye through those first 2 rounds, through that free-for-all 1-game playoff, and then you're getting also a bye for the wild card round, you're still getting maybe 5 days off. So you're getting what you have right now. So baseball can certainly get creative with more teams in doing something like that. I really thought that after the pandemic season, we were going to have a scenario in which baseball considered possibly having one venue like for the Super Bowl. Because again, they were forced to do that in Texas at Globe Life Field. And I think a lot of fans don't like that idea because, baseball, again, has never done that. And football is the only sport where they do that. But if you could have one city that is going to host the World Series every year, not the same city, but you move it around. And again, that does limit you a little bit because a place like Denver, you're not going to want games late in October for the chance of snow. It's still gorgeous in Denver in October and in November. And it's been gorgeous for the last week plus at the end of January and the beginning of February. But you still get snow in May. You get snow in October. You don't know what you're going to get. You might need a dome for something like that. So baseball can certainly get creative. Absolutely. Yeah, Taylor, appreciate it. The NBA play-in game, you can do something. You can bring that back. Now we've got a wild card round where it's best of 3. And if you just snuck into the playoffs, then you're going somewhere else and you've got to win 2 out of 3 in another building. You could still have something like that. And it does make it rough on that wild card team that has to win that 1-of-1 game because they're getting on a flight to go to one location before having to get on a flight to go to another spot. That's just what the playoffs are. You just have to deal with something like that. West likes the idea. What's going on, buddy? You might like when I talk about the next team coming up on the 20 different cities that could have an MLB franchise, because 2 of them are in Texas. And yes, you got to go to one of the World Series games right there. And guess what? Your team wasn't in it. West is a fan and a great journalist covering the Texas Rangers for justbaseball.com. Highly recommend you check out his work. He does a great job. But guess what? Despite the fact the Rangers were not in the 2020 World Series, he went to that game. A lot of people went to that game because it's the World Series. You're a baseball fan. Now, if you're a team of the Dodgers or the Rays, you're probably bummed out because you didn't get to see your team in your ballpark. But again, that happens in the NFL. That happens in the Super Bowl each and every year. I don't think baseball is going to change, but you certainly could have some kind of festival for a day or 2 and have a specific location for that 1-of-1 game, that special double wild card game, if you will. Instead of it being a wild card series, it's a definitive wild card game to allow you to have 14 teams. They'll figure it out. We can have fun. We can play with that. But next team on the list, number 5, they've got a group together, ATXMLB.com. That's right. Austin, Texas. The Austin Baseball Commission, LLC, was launched last summer, middle of July, as a grassroots organization devoted to bringing Major League Baseball to Austin, Texas. Now, the group cites this early success of Austin FC for MLS as proof of concept that, hey, Austin is a big league city. Nearby, they got a club in the Round Rock Express that does good business. But that's about 35 miles northeast of town. So it's a big college city. I know the population's over 1 million. I was shocked when I went there 2 years ago February of 2023. Wanted to see what the buzz was about in Austin. I was like, oh, it's one of those weird places. Keep Austin weird. Keep Boulder weird. Keep Asheville weird. Okay, so it's probably in line with that. And then I go and I see these massive buildings and I say, whoa, Austin is not some weird little town. Sure, it's quirky, but boy, oh boy, it's a big city. It really is, and it's continuing to grow. So there's not a ton of stuff on that website. They do have some merch if you wanted to do that. But again, as I said, it's one of the fastest growing cities in the U.S. It's got a young and diverse population, which Major League Baseball is going to like. They call themselves the live music capital of the world. I'm worried that Austin might not be considered West enough to shift the layout of the league more westernly. Again, Portland, Utah, they do that. Could you possibly have Portland and Austin and you don't go the Tennessee, North Carolina route? That very well could happen. In the chat, yeah. Texas money is real. Oil money, sure. Not everyone who lives in Texas, owns a derrick or has worked on one. Let's keep that in mind. But still, Texas could support another team, I think, for sure. Still got another Texas city to talk about. The Rangers and Astros wouldn't be big fans of this because, again, of where Austin is located, about 3 hours, almost equidistant from Houston and Arlington. And the Expos, the Round Rock Express has been a minor league affiliate for both the Rangers and Astros in the past. So, both of them would kind of claim that territory. And if an Austin team were to come about, now it would be neither Rangers or Astros. Instead of splitting that market, they would just lose that market in theory altogether. I think that one becomes a very, very hard one. I think those in that Austin group see it as an opportunity to bring some other things and bring some other major sports to Austin. But I don't really have the confidence that Austin could be one of those final destinations for Major League Baseball. A lot of time still left on the clock for them to change my mind. But Austin right now might be on the outside looking in. Another city I'm not too convinced has a shot. But again, we got a long way to go. Charlotte, North Carolina. They don't even have a website. But in March of 2023, the deputy mayor of Charlotte did say there's no plans for a stadium that have been submitted to the Charlotte City Council. But, according to one of the founders of this group in Charlotte's one of the fastest, largest growing cities without Major League Baseball. And that's true. They do have a newer downtown ballpark for AAA. It's a gorgeous AAA facility. And it unfortunately was not built with expansion in mind. By that, I mean expansion of the ballpark. So I don't think there's any way that they could retrofit it to support, more decks above it so that it could have at least 30,000. I think 35,000 is the smallest ballpark right now for Major League Baseball, technically speaking. We're not going to count the two minor league teams where the A's and Rays are playing. But Tropicana Field had 35,000. Charlotte only has the NBA right now, and it's the 21st largest TV market, but it is second best among expansion sites. They would have to work something out with Atlanta, possibly again being in that area. And, it kind of fits in within the geographic region of all of those minor league teams, which I don't necessarily see as being bad because there is that passion for baseball in North Carolina. But Charlotte still has some work to do, that group. Number 7 on the list, and the first in Canada, Montreal. That's right, the MontrealBaseballProject.com. Next year is actually the 20th anniversary, or rather this season, 2005, is the 20th anniversary of Montreal no longer having Major League Baseball. Nats, their first year, the Washington Nationals, was 2005. Now, the MontrealBaseballProject.com website, which again, it's not the be-all end-all, but it might give you an idea of where their group is at right now. It's not terribly well maintained. Their last update was back in 2019 when they're on the precipice of getting Major League Baseball back. You may have forgotten, but the Rays nearly split their season in Montreal. Now, this group has been trying to get a team back in Montreal for a while. It's actually the largest metro area in either the US or Canada that does not have a Major League Baseball team. They were very supportive of the Expos when the team was there. That was just heartbreaking. I mean, even look at 1994 when the players' strike went down. Expos had the best and most exciting team in all of baseball, and they just didn't recover from that, unfortunately. Now, this group back in 2013, they put together a feasibility survey to see if Montreal really wanted baseball to return. 69% of Quebecers and 81% of business owners surveyed supported MLB's return. The study concluded, again, this is their study, that it would require a little over $1 billion in government and private funding, a strong ownership group, which they've got in place now, and a 36,000-seat ballpark constructed within 2 kilometers of downtown. And yes, I said kilometers because they're Canada. But again, let's not forget, in 2019, the Rays actually got permission from Major League Baseball to explore splitting their season in both Tampa and Montreal. They were going to have a 50-50 kind of season. When it was nice in the summertime, they'd be in Montreal, and in the not as nice times of the year, you got your dome in Tampa to take care of you. But unfortunately, when push came to shove, 2022 rolled around, Major League Baseball rejected the Rays' plan to do this, which was unfortunate. It was a real tease. So Montreal's current group includes Steven Bronfman. You might know that name because he's the son of one of the original owners, one of the original Expos owners, Charles Bronfman. Back in 2015, their group wrote a letter to all 30 MLB teams about Montreal as an expansion city. So they are still alive. Despite the fact I think Nashville is number 1 for the East Coast, Montreal is a sneaky good city. I think Montreal really could be number 2 there on the East Coast side of things. I think that very well could end up happening. Number 8 on this list of groups or cities that have groups is kind of a surprising one. We touched on it earlier in the show. Raleigh, North Carolina. MLBRaleigh.com is the site. They're calling themselves the Raleigh Capitals, as Raleigh is the capital of North Carolina. I'm not sure they could actually use that name since the Washington Capitals exist. But Raleigh Capitals, they've got a cap logo already. It's like an old English looking R. They've got a primary uniform design. Raleigh currently has the Carolina Hurricanes. And they probably seem like the most far-fetched option of the ones discussed so far. But as their site points out, Raleigh, just as a city, might not be popping off, but their entire region is. They call it the Triangle. It's really the research triangle between Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, right? Some major universities that are there. And when you look at that triangle and you look at that population of the triangle, it's actually in line with Milwaukee, Kansas City, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. They all have got major league teams. The growth rate in this area, in this region, is eclipsing all the small market baseball teams in the next 15 years. That's how rapidly that area of North Carolina is growing. They think that by 2037, and you add in all the forecasted growth rates, they're going to be ahead of all of those teams I listed, including St. Louis. That's a mid-market team in St. Louis. They would actually have a larger population in that region to pull from. The Triangle region, as the site likes to point out, has a stronger media market. Stronger? Is it larger or stronger? What do those words actually mean? Again, everyone's going to look good. Everyone's going to try to make themselves look as good as possible. But according to them, they've got a stronger media market than a lot of the other expansion hopefuls, such as Portland, Nashville, Salt Lake City, San Antonio, in Las Vegas. And the Triangle is just that close. They sit at 22, so they're just barely behind Charlotte. Last August, the owner of the Hurricanes, Tom Dundon, he was actually given right to develop some 80 acres of open land around the home of the Hurricanes. So Raleigh could be one of those locations. Next up, so those are the groups. There's actually eight different cities that have a group. But I got about 11 more cities that could be a fit for Major League Baseball. There's 5 to me that are making noise, but they don't have a group yet. So they could eventually accommodate Major League Baseball. Number 1 on that list has to be San Antonio. San Antonio has the largest population of any U.S. city without a Major League Baseball team. They're about 6th or 7th in the U.S., depending on what you're looking at. 31st largest media market. Believe it or not, they actually had some buzz when Montreal was considering relocation. Now, one of the things that hurts them, you could argue, is their own people, because there was a local commentator that said not that long ago that San Antonio would have trouble landing professional sports teams because its city is, quote, poor, quote, lacks visionaries. That guy got a lot of flack for those kind of comments. Because when you think about San Antonio, yeah, they got the Spurs. I don't know if they have WNBA anymore, though. I think they might have lost that team. They're not in MLS just yet, but there's still tons of potential there. There's still tons of potential in San Antonio. They got the Missions there, so they've got, a high-level minor league club that I think they might be back down to being AA. They were AA for a while, then they were AAA. I think they're AA again. But in terms of just area of land, San Antonio is actually bigger than Dallas and Denver, and both of those cities have teams in the Big Four sports, including MLS. So San Antonio, very quiet, but still has that potential. And if Major League Baseball wants to be in Texas, even more than it already is, San Antonio could be that spot. I've got Vancouver next on my list, and I've got nothing written for them. So take off, hoser, as we see here in the chat. Vancouver's not making any noise whatsoever. Again, it's situated nicely up there in the Pacific Northwest, far too close to Seattle, and far too close for the Toronto Blue Jays. The Blue Jays would have you think that they would not want a team in Vancouver because that's partially their market. They are Canada's team. They don't want to share Canada with Vancouver. Not one bit. They don't. So if Montreal ends up coming back, so be it. Toronto's a little bit further west than Montreal. So, okay, they would still feel like they've got Vancouver. But Vancouver's currently doing nothing right now. They don't even have a AAA facility. That's another strange thing. You look and you think about Vancouver as a city and a sports city. You would think they've got a AA or AAA club. For a while, it was short season ball. And before Major League Baseball restructured the minors, it was short season. So they weren't even playing 6 months out of the year. Now they're in the Northwest League. They're in the High A Northwest League. But nevertheless, Vancouver's not really making any noise. I don't see them as viable. I also don't see New Orleans as being viable. Again, they don't have a group, but they do have some history. They do have some things going for them. They've got the NFL and the NBA already, and the Saints and the Pelicans. Though they did lose their AAA club after the pandemic, the New Orleans Baby Cakes, they ended up shifting that affiliate, if you will, to Wichita, Kansas. And in fact, the New Orleans Baby Cakes, if you know your history, were previously the New Orleans Zephyrs. And before they were in New Orleans, they were in Denver. They were the Denver Zephyrs. So the Denver Bears, the original Denver Bears who became the Zephyrs, they moved to New Orleans and then they moved to Wichita, Kansas. So minor league baseball doesn't have the same thread of history as Major League Baseball does, where there are probably people in Philadelphia right now that are excited to go and see the A's in Sacramento because, oh man, my grandfather went to Connie Mack Stadium or Shibe Park and saw the Philadelphia A's in Philadelphia. Then they moved to Kansas City. Then they moved to Oakland. Now they're in Sacramento on their way to Las Vegas. It's a little bit different when you're talking top of the pile. You're talking about the big leagues, literally and figuratively. But in the minors, if you try to follow all the connective tissue between different minor league franchises, how they move around. It's just really not the same. But for those of you in the Rocky Mountain region, I figured you'd find that interesting. Now, New Orleans is also the 50th largest TV market in the U.S. Not great. But I discussed the Tampa Montreal split season. And I found it interesting to learn while preparing this special show that the Tampa Montreal split season wasn't the first time that concept was floated out there. Cleveland in 1971, the owner at the time, Vernon Stouffer, he basically needed some money and he agreed without really getting any approval. Remember, sometimes it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission. But he said, I'm going to play 30 games a year for the next 25 years in New Orleans. They were building the Superdome that would eventually get built and start operation in 1975. The AL president at the time, Hall of Famer Joe Cronin, killed the idea, saying, like, you're going to kill Cleveland. Like, that's not going to work. If you split that, you're going to lose all of those fans. And he's right. Ultimately, that's why I don't think the Rays ended up having that split season in Montreal. Now, Charlie Finley, who, again, was at the center of the Athletics, moving from city to city, going from Kansas City to Oakland, at the time, he was actually in favor of what would later become known as the Guardians. He was in favor of Cleveland moving to New Orleans outright. He just thought, yeah, that's a great idea. But, of course, we know that didn't happen. The New Orleans Guardians. Doesn't have a great sound to it. But we could have had a time, we could have had at a certain point in the 90s, in the 80s even, where Cleveland had no NFL or MLB, because the Cleveland Browns, as I mentioned earlier, moved to Baltimore to become the Ravens. And then if Cleveland would have moved to New Orleans in the 70s, no baseball there either. The last two that I think could be options as far as they're being big cities. They don't have a group, but I could see them jumping into the fray. I could see that. I want to get to this chat here. Our homeboy, Guillaume. Montreal won't come back. Distraught emoji. It's been talked for years, and I can't see anything going in that direction. New stadium would have to be built downtown, but plans are shaky. Look, Guillaume, you're not wrong for protecting your heart and your head. Either way. But I do think Montreal is going to be in the conversation. I don't think Major League Baseball likes that option quite as much as Nashville on the East Coast. But is there a world in which Montreal becomes a better expansion site so that Nashville becomes that city that teams talk about moving to? Again, Denver was that city for a lot of teams where they would look and say, you know what, we might want to move to Denver. I think that's a viable market. I feel like you can only do that so much with Montreal before it becomes just not feasible. You can't trick us. Fool me 18 times. Shame on me. It can't happen 19 times. I think didn't George Bush say that? Quote unquote. But maybe Major League Baseball, again, all things being equal, maybe Montreal looks slightly better than Nashville. And then Nashville becomes that city that if you need a new ballpark and something's not working out, you end up moving your team to Nashville. Or you at least pretend you're going to move your team to Nashville until you get a new stadium. So I hope for your sake, Guillaume, that baseball does come back in Montreal, because that was a rockin' baseball city at the time. And since you just arrived, you may have missed me say earlier on, one of the most interesting and exciting things about expansion isn't just that you're getting 2 new teams in the majors, you're getting 8 new teams in the minors. So could Montreal join the Eastern League? Could Montreal at least get a AA club for the time being to put them back on that baseball map and start that next clock for expansion? It absolutely could. It absolutely could. So two final cities that they don't have groups. They're not making any noise. Well, these two cities are actually making noise. They don't have groups, but I think they could end up being players. And I think they make sense. Sacramento and Oakland. Now, we know that right now, Sacramento is just a holdover spot for the Athletics. We know that the owner of the Sacramento River Cats, Vivek Randive, he basically talked with the A's and said, you can use my facility. We can test Sacramento out as a market. Smart guy. He also owns the Sacramento Kings. And at the time that this was originally announced, he said a lot of interesting things about Sacramento being a city on the rise. It's the capital of California. And you would think, as often as you might hear Sacramento, and again, you know the Kings are there, you know they exist, maybe Sacramento becomes a major player, a much more major city than it currently is. It's the capital, it's pretty major, but a major sports locale in the state of California. Because if Oakland's not going to be that, and Oakland is not that anymore, in the last 5 years, Oakland has lost 3 major sports franchises. They're losing the Athletics. They lost the Golden State Warriors to San Francisco proper, and the Raiders left for Las Vegas. Oakland could get back into this conversation, but the way that they balked at the A's ownership shows that they aren't necessarily wanting to play hardball, pun intended. So while an expansion team would be something totally different, you're still negotiating with Major League Baseball. You're still dealing with that. You're still dealing with the same, here are my demands. Here's my list of things that need to get done in order for you to get Major League Baseball into your city. And in the case of Oakland, to get it back into your city. So Sacramento, I think, would have a much better chance when that city gets a taste of the Athletics. Could they become players? I think so. And if you look at where they're located in relation to Portland, you say, maybe Sacramento is an even better location than Portland. There might be less red tape in Sacramento than in Portland. It's hard to say. Could be a toss-up. Again, when it comes to the West Coast, I would put Portland as 1A and Salt Lake City as 1B. Ask me tomorrow and I might change my mind, because I think Salt Lake City has a sneaky good case. They've got a sneaky good group that they've put together that could make that push and be that West Coast team. But if there's a number 3, it might have to be Sacramento. Salt Lake City, Portland, with Sacramento trailing as the number 3 West Coast club. Tickets for those games, I have not gone online to see how much the Sacramento A's games, what their tickets are going to be like. I think right now they're probably, very high, catastrophically high. I don't know. I haven't checked, but they'll eventually come down, because there's only so many people that are going to make that trek to Sacramento. And if you're there and you're a huge baseball fan, you'll go. But otherwise, I don't think it will be ultimately that bad. I don't think it'll be that crazy. Now, when you're talking about a team like the Yankees and their fans travel incredibly well, and they're just everywhere. Okay, yeah, you're going to be paying, a lot of money for those tickets, a lot more than you would have when they were in Oakland. But, if the Brewers are coming to town this year, the Rockies don't play the A's in the A's home facility until 2026. Again, that's going to be more affordable, even if it is on the weekend. But those tickets are going to be a lot. Taylor asking, are you sure it's going to be 2 expansion teams and not 4 all at once? Yeah, I think it's just going to be 2 for right now. And you can, again, just like in the 90s, immediately turn around and say in 5 years, we're going to expand to 34. If the baseball business is that good, you could then do that. But to find 4 teams, that's going to pay your asking price. Because again, it's about getting the most bang for your buck. And as I said at the beginning of the show, once you get every city and every stadium situation squared away, you've got nowhere to go. You can't just buy a team for $2 billion and move it to your city. So you now have to pay a $2 billion, maybe even $2.5 billion expansion fee. and now you've got your own team. So I think you almost want to, again, you don't want to have too much supply. So you do 2 at a time. You do 32. If that works out, great. And you say, man, these 8 groups that came forward, and there's going to be more. There's still going to be more in the next couple of years before that official announcement is made about expansion. But you're going to say, these are the best 2, but there were still 4 other cities, I think, that could support baseball, could expand, and could now put together possibly $3 billion. It could be up to as high as $3 billion by that point. So by slow playing that out, you end up making a lot more money. And I've got 6 more cities. 6 more cities worth discussing. Actually, I think it might be 7. That they're making no noise whatsoever. And I don't know that Major League Baseball could ever see itself going there. And the first on that list would have to be Buffalo, which is ironic because it wasn't that long ago that Buffalo had Major League Baseball during the pandemic. When the Blue Jays could not play in Canada, they played at Salem Field in 2020 and 2021. And there's some good baseball history in Buffalo. Some really good baseball history. The War Memorial Stadium, built in 1937, it was actually used as the fictitious home for the New York Knights for the filming of The Natural. Okay, I don't know why that would mean you deserve to get a Major League Baseball team, but Buffalo is important to note. In a similar way to Orlando, they've always been there. Buffalo has always been a city that's an also ran. They had a lot of strong support in the 60s, and they were going to get one of the National League franchises in 1969, but there were some last-minute politicking, if you will, that allowed San Diego to get that vote. Now, Buffalo, this is a great book, very, very short book, small book. Again, if you're a baseball nerd, you're going to enjoy it. It's called the Continental League, and it's about the Continental League. It was going to be a second major league. It was going to get started in the 60s. 1961 was going to be the first year. A group came together and said, you know what? Major League Baseball's got this legal monopoly, and there are some really great and really viable cities. What if we started our own big league in these other auxiliary cities? What if we did that? And so there was an announcement that was made in 1959 that there was going to be a rival to the major leagues. And it was called the Continental League. It had 8 teams in 8 cities. There's one in Minneapolis, one in Denver, one in Dallas, Houston, Toronto, New York City, Atlanta, and Buffalo. And what you'll notice about that list is all 7 of those 8 cities ended up getting Major League Baseball teams. Everyone except Buffalo. Major League Baseball decided that, yeah, you know what? National League Baseball should exist in New York. And after the Dodgers and Giants left after the 1957 season to go to California, there was only one team in New York, the Yankees. So William Shea, who headed up the group that was going to be in New York for the Continental League, he was given an offer from Major League Baseball. He accepted it, and ultimately that kind of disbanded the Continental League. They even have they ran a minor league for 1 year, believe it or not. So because of the Continental League kind of, I don't know, getting the snowball rolling down the hill, it picked up a lot of momentum and really convinced Major League Baseball that, yeah, you know what, we do need to start expanding. And then in 1961, they did. And a lot of that had to do with the Continental League. And the only of the 8 cities that still does not have a Major League Baseball team is Buffalo. That's kind of sad. Jacksonville. Let's talk about them briefly. They got the Jumbo Shrimp. They're in AAA. They don't have any MLS teams there even. Jaguars in the NFL. But the Jaguars, they play a ton of games over in London every year. So it's good, that the NFL has Jacksonville to step up. But one of the reasons for that is because they're just not drawing in Jacksonville. So I don't hear anything out of them, and I don't know that we're going to. Memphis. Memphis feels like it could be a viable city, right? They've got the Grizzlies there. They don't have MLS. I think they were working on trying to get a team in MLS, but they do not. They do have a UFL team for what that's worth. They got AAA baseball, the Memphis Redbirds. I sort of feel like Memphis is a lot like Orlando was in the 90s. They're kind of the second fiddle to a better option, right? In Nashville and even Charlotte. Nashville is just such a much better location. You can even argue Raleigh is still better than Memphis. What I found to be interesting in preparing for this show is that North Carolina and Tennessee are the only two states in the U.S. that have 3 major sports and not Major League Baseball. Yeah, that's kind of wild to think about. North Carolina and Tennessee are the only 2 states to have 3 of the 4 Big 4 sports leagues: NFL, NBA, NHL, but they do not have Major League Baseball. That could all change with the next MLB expansion. Another city that I would put as a dark horse, it's certainly it might be a not very sexy city. And you're thinking about, oh man, this is a cool place to go hang out at. I've gone there for a bachelor party, bachelorette party, one of those things. It probably is towards the bottom of that list in general, but I think it deserves a mention. And that's Oklahoma City. Yes, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. They got a AAA club, Oklahoma City Dodgers, that I'm sure is doing a lot for baseball fans that love the game. They're seeing guys that they root for in the Pacific Coast League right there in their backyard, and a couple of them getting opportunities on the Dodgers to make an impact and win a World Series ring. Getting the Thunder in the NBA was huge. That really, I think, put Oklahoma City on the map as being a major league type city. OKC is also home to the World Cup of Softball and the NCAA Women's College World Series. You might be shocked to learn the 2028 Olympics is also going to be played in Oklahoma City. Now, Los Angeles is the host. However, the LA Olympic Organizing Committee opted to have canoe slalom, which is basically whitewater slalom, and softball in Oklahoma City because there just weren't enough acceptable venues in LA. So Oklahoma City hosting the Olympics. It's the spot for the World Cup of Softball. They host the Women's College World Series. OKC has a sneaky good case. Here's another one. I got 3 more cities to talk about that if you're looking around, again, you're looking at cities that already have maybe NFL, NBA, NHL. That makes sense. It's wild to think that, that the 4 major sports just aren't all in the exact same cities, right? I think there's only about 9 cities that have all 4, maybe even less that have all 4 and MLS. But one city that's got both the NFL and the NBA is Indianapolis. Don't sleep on Indianapolis. It's got the 9th largest population, according to U.S. Census. It's got those 2 pro sports teams, 2 of the big 4 teams. Now, when you're looking at the largest population for a U.S. city, the locations that are just ahead of Indianapolis are Arizona, Massachusetts, and Tennessee. Each of those teams have at least 3 of the big 4 plus MLS. In fact, Boston's got 5. Tennessee has 4. When you look behind them in terms of population, Maryland has 3. That doesn't include the Washington, D.C. teams. The exception is the Commanders, who they're actually not in D.C. proper, so they are considered to be in Maryland. But Missouri has 5, St. Louis, Kansas City. Wisconsin's got 3, and Colorado has 5. So Indianapolis has only 2 sports teams in the Big 5. And yet all of the other cities with almost an equally as large population have at least 3. little unusual. Now, Indianapolis has had a notable Negro League franchise in the past, the Clowns. They began play in the 1930s. And in fact, they were the last Negro League team to disband in the 1980s. Now, in 1985, a group of local Indianapolis investors were really hoping that they could get a major league team, either via relocation. The Pirates and the A's were for sale at the time, or they would get expansion. Now, the Colts had just moved to Indianapolis the year before, and that group was able to get 12,000 season ticket deposits just on a lark that, hey, maybe Indianapolis could get Major League Baseball. That was the passion there in Indianapolis. They got a AAA team right now. But they were going to call themselves the Indianapolis Arrows. Unfortunately, that never happened. They thought about repurposing the Hoosier Dome for baseball. It was going to be a challenge. The funds for a new facility, unfortunately, just were not possible. It didn't really help, too, that Indianapolis is relatively close to Cincinnati, St. Louis, Chicago. So that certainly would have met resistance from a lot of the other owners. But now in 2025 and going forward, how much pull could someone like a Caitlin Clark of the Indiana Fever of the WNBA, how much pull could she possibly have as part of an ownership group? That's what makes Indianapolis somewhat of a wild card here. Finally, you got Mexico. Now that seems surprising, right? Mexico does seem like a surprise because you're going to a country that there are no major sports teams in as far as the North American landscape, right? What's up, Will? Victory Field in Indianapolis, quite nice. Never been there. Jack McMullen of Just Baseball, he's doing play-by-play there. I'll have to ask him next time I talk to him. So how nice is that facility that's there? That's cool. Thank you, Will. But Mexico, you got Mexico City or Monterrey. Now, back in 2018, one of the first times Manfred started talking about the possibility for expansion and the finalists. He went through the usual suspects, all the cities that I just named. But he also added, quote, "We think there's places in Mexico we could go over the long haul." Now, did that mean when they expand to 32? Or, like Taylor asked earlier in the show, is that maybe when they go to 34? I would tend to think it could be 34, maybe even beyond that. But Mexico City could be the better location than Monterrey, despite the fact that Mexico City is that much further away from everything else. Monterrey is 490 miles away from the nearest team in MLB, and Mexico City is even further than that. But MLB has an office in Mexico City. It should be noted. They got a great ballpark. Rockies fans, I know, saw it last year when they played the A's over 2 games at Alfredo Harp Helú Stadium. It's just a beautiful facility. Cost just under $170 million. It was deemed ultra modern even by Major League Baseball standards. Now, it does only hold 20,000. So that is shy of Tropicana Field, which is at 25. I think earlier I said 35. But 25 is currently the smallest of the actual Major League facilities and not the minor league ones that are going to be used for the next couple of years. Monterrey is also, I think, would be considered part of the Astros market. I'm sure they could figure something out financially for compensation. You certainly hope that the Diamondbacks don't ever move to Mexico. But is that going to be one of the things that gets floated here in the next 5 or so years? Could be. It could be. You know, is that also part of the math when you talk about, well, you know, we're playing a lot more games in Mexico than in years past. We're doing that. We know how much Major League Baseball is playing over in Japan. Does Japan enter the fray at some point as an expansion city? It's a country, I know. But does Tokyo enter that fray? I think we're still a very long ways away from something like that. And you got the London series, which is, again, far enough away from Boston and New York that I don't think that becomes viable. But Mexico, being on the same continent, I think does. I think it does. But could the Diamondbacks float that idea? Will Major League Baseball help with that? Absolutely. And again, you have to have your stadium situation squared away nicely. And as much as you might have a billionaire owner that would just say, look, I'm going to move the team here, or I'm going to even expand here. I'll pay the $2 billion and I'm going to go build a brand new stadium and I'm going to pay for all of it. You can't do that. You have to have your cities, according to Major League Baseball, not by rules, but by business standards. Major League Baseball teams want cities to pay for part of the cost of new facilities, because as soon as one team pays entirely for a brand new facility, then every team in every city is going to get the finger pointed right back at them and saying, you know, so-and-so just paid for a brand new stadium. Why don't you do that? We're not going to give you any money. So Major League Baseball is almost its own team. The owners, they are their own group. They work together. They make decisions together in concert. So you have to have your stadium situation tightened up. You can't have any cities that are in danger of losing their club so that a new club can go ahead and acquire them. You have to make sure that that doesn't happen. And once that's all locked away, then you can finally expand. North Jersey getting a team, we're still a long ways away from that. I can remember, I was in college. I wasn't in high school, but I remember being in college on my notebook during a particularly boring lecture. I maybe how many teams would I have come? 64? I don't, right? Because of March Madness. 32 is just boring. So that doesn't do anything. So maybe like 48. I'm sure I put a team in Honolulu. Again, you can create all different kinds of scenarios, but what year are we in which you get 48 teams? 200 years from now? Who knows? So because of that, you have to take the best of the best. And right now, North Jersey, I don't know that they can necessarily support a team. They're already all Mets and Yankees fanatics. So I don't think that would fit. And I think the Yankees and the Mets are also not going to want something like that. There's going to be major pushback. That's not going to work. I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Puerto Rico. That's one of those places too, San Juan, Puerto Rico, where you could look at and say, hey, I wonder if that's a outside the box concept. I think they could be for a minor league team. Again, that's what makes this so interesting. 2 new major league teams, 8 new minor league teams. Now, these clubs in AA, probably the AA Southern League, I think that would fit in really nicely. That's going to be incurring a lot of extra costs to be flying in and out of San Juan. I don't know that you're going to want to do that. But if you want to test out that market, that could be a way that you test out the Caribbean, is you put a team, a AA team for the Southern League down in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So look, we could talk Honolulu. Anchorage, is Anchorage going to be in the conversation? I don't think so. But it's fun. And I appreciate you guys joining me at Patrick D. Lyons, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB, at Rockies Insider. I hope you enjoyed this. If you're still around now, watching after me talking for 2 straight hours, I love you, because you're messed up in the head in all the right ways, because you love baseball like I love baseball. And I really greatly appreciate your support in a big way. I will not be forgetting the names that I'm seeing in this chat. So if you're watching now, just say hi. Just say hi in the chat so you can get some credit for being here and watching live with me on YouTube, because you are absolutely a real one. I do appreciate that. Glad you enjoyed this conversation. I'll be chopping it up on the podcast side of things, breaking it up so that is a lot more digestible for you. But I really appreciate everybody joining me. Maybe I'll see you on Saturday. Our Sabre Day celebration is going down. It's at Stanley Beer Hall. Swing on by. I think we get started about 9:30. The beer hall opens at 9:30 is when we'll start going with the festivities. I'll be hosting a conversation with Mark Knudsen, who has a book, Pitching on the Corners, with a teammate of his, Don August, talking about his playing career over in Asia. Manny Randhawa is going to be talking about his book, The Blake Street Bombers. We'll have copies that are there that we're going to be giving out. It's a free event. Come hang out. It's one of the few free events going on in the Denver area. We got a little trivia contest going on that you can either participate in or not. Do it anonymously. Have some fun. Be around some really great baseball people. Maybe some other surprise guests showing up as well. So should be another really fun weekend, as we are a week away. Next Thursday is when pitchers and catchers are reporting for those Colorado Rockies. A couple teams a day or two before that as well. So appreciate you joining me. Appreciate the momentum. But as I like to say, momentum, it's only as good as your next show. So, of course, I'll talk to you then.